Okay, so there are actually some concerns of whether we'd even get a race or not. A few days before the race weekend began, there was a missile attack in the country. And then towards the end of FP1, on Friday afternoon, there was an explosion at an Aramco facility, literally right by the circuit, and that was later confirmed as another missile attack. On Friday evening, FP2 was delayed by 15 minutes as the teams, all representatives of the teams were all sent into a meeting in the paddock, just to basically an emergency meeting, just to say what's going on. It was later confirmed to be a sort of terrorist attack, which is not great and not safe. And I was shocked to see the team principals voted unanimously to continue racing, but there you are. Maybe money talks. It definitely does, especially especially the rumours that Formula One have been paid a lot of money, probably for the deal to have the race in Saudi Arabia. It didn't seem right with me. So the team principals were in agreement to continue racing as normal, but the drivers needed a little bit more convincing. They were meeting up until the early hours of the night in Saudi Arabia to see who, just to have a gander of who was racing, who wasn't. The drivers, a lot of them were thinking about dropping out, but they got convinced. I wonder what convinced them. I don't know, but yeah, and by Saturday morning, it was confirmed that the race weekend would go ahead as normal. FP3 quali and obviously the race as well were unaffected from that point as well. So I don't really know what happened there, but we got a race and I'm happy about it, even though it was very, very dangerous in my opinion. Okay, so qualifying came about, and Nicola Latifi had an early crash which halted the early run-in, brought out the red flag after losing it in turn 13, and Yuki Tsunoda had an issue as well which put him out of qualifying early. The McLarens were looking faster in qualifying as well, both Lando and Daniel being more competitive, as were the Mercedes. Well, one Mercedes, George Russell, was competitive. Lewis Hamilton, on the other hand, he struggled, and he actually got P16 in Q1. He got knocked out by Lance Stroll. Lewis didn't really seem to have the right setup. He's doing well in practice. He obviously must have tweaked something, as George said in an interview. I think he said that Lewis tweaked something after EP3, and they went a little bit too far in the wrong direction. Lewis started P16 in qualifying. That was a massive shock, and it set up a great storyline for the race on Sunday. Q2 came along, and Mick Schumacher had a big incident in that. A big one that brought out a red flag for about half an hour or so. I'm just glad Mick was okay. Luckily, he managed to get away. He was left at the hospital, but he was fine the next day. The track inside. It's about the place being dangerous. The track in Saudi Arabia is very dangerous as well. 2 years in a row, Mick has had a big crash like that, and very unfortunate for the Haas team as well. They chose not to run him in Sunday's race just to save parts and stuff due to the cost cap in the 2022 regulations. They got spare parts at the track, but if they wasted them, then it'd be very difficult on the team going ahead into Australia. No real surprises in Q2 really. The same sort of suspects and the fastest cars we saw in Bahrain got through, and then in Q3 Sergio Perez got pole. Fair play, Checo, mate. Honestly, he said it. If he's done 1,000, if he did 1,000 laps, this one will be the one. It's probably the best lap of his career, and he put it on pole. And fair play to Checo. I mean, this car seems to suit him a lot more than it did the very front end 2021 Red Bull, which obviously Max won the championship. And this time, Checo and Max are quite close, and it is quite good. I mean, it just shows how favourable that old Red Bull, when he was teammates of Gasly and Albon, how much more favourable it is to Max. And Perez was the best of the three as well, so it just shows how good of a driver Sergio Perez is. Max Verstappen couldn't get as much out of his car as Checo did, and he ended up P4, struggling in both laps. I think he said that he couldn't get the heat in the tyres. And then the two Ferrari boys, Charles Leclerc starts alongside Perez in the front row, whilst Carlos Sainz had a good lap. He actually set provisional pole in the first one in Q3 on used tyres, but couldn't get the new ones up to temperature. He ended up P3 in qualifying. So as I got into earlier, Mick Schumacher didn't start the race, and Yuki Tsunoda also didn't start the race. On the way to the grid, he had a similar engine problem. I think it was a similar one to Saturday. Don't hold me on that, but I think it was a similar issue to the one that kept out on qualifying on Saturday. So there was only one AlphaTauri in the race as well, the AlphaTauri of Pierre Gasly. And And then Daniel Ricciardo had a 3-place grid penalty for holding up Esteban Ocon on a push lap in qualifying 2. And that was pretty much it to start the race. Let's talk about the race, shall we? Okay, so everybody but Nico Hülkenberg, Kevin Magnussen and Lewis Hamilton started on the medium tyre. Those 3 up there for a longer strategy, hopefully a 1-stop as well. And then everybody else was on the mediums, going for the 2-stop. Then the lights went out. Sergio Perez remained in P1 going into turn 1. Behind him was Charles Leclerc, but behind Charles Leclerc, that was Max Verstappen. Verstappen got a great start off the line, and then Carlos was stuck behind his teammate. He just sort of went on the wrong side of him, which caused Matt to get past him on the braking zone into turn 1. Guan Yu Zhou went down 5 places after a slow start, similar to the one Bottas had in Bahrain. And then he came onto the radio as well and said the same problem again. So I think that pretty much confirms that suspicion. A lap later, Pierre Gasly started to drop down the field a bit. Nobody really said why at the time. I still can't figure it out myself unless I'm missing something. But Lando Norris made a great move down on turn 1 on Pierre Gasly, just sort of sneaking in there. And then Magnussen got past him on the first lap as well. That's what I mean by that. So Gasly sort of dropped down the order. He came back as well. But yeah, so Pierre Gasly had a bit of a poor start as well. As we got past turn 1 and stuff, he just sort of dropped him down the order. Towards the end of lap 4, George Russell managed to go down the inside of Esteban Ocon to go up to P5 at the time. He managed to get DRS as well, so to escape from the Alpine and remain in P5 towards the start of lap 5. And yeah, it was a great move by George. Then a lap later, Pierre Gasly got Lando Norris back. Ultimately he had the quicker car. The AlphaTauri has shown pace all weekend, and it's got the Red Bull powertrain as unit as well. So so Gasly got Lando back. And then the camera quickly panned down to this Alpine battle that literally just a lap after getting overtaken by George Russell, Ocon had Fernando Alonso on his tail, and this mad battle started really. We saw some super aggressive defending from Esteban Ocon. We saw him moving on the straight to fend off Alonso, and that tempted Fernando to come back a little bit more aggressive later on in the race as well. On the next lap, Alonso got a lot closer but couldn't get past him, and then on lap 7, Fernando Alonso got it done. He was a bit aggressive to close the corner to get back at Ocon from earlier, and we thought that was it, but no, they carried on for a little bit more. Ultimately Alonso ended up in front, but their 2 battling saw Valtteri Bottas close in, and yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare for Alpine. But fair play to Otmar Safnauer actually letting the 2 of them race. He said, Crofty and Jenson Button went on the on to interview him a couple of laps after the start of the battle, and he was like, so right now we're letting them race at the start, and fair play to Otmar. We got a good show from the 2 Alpine drivers, and it's pretty much what we saw last year, but obviously they could follow a little bit more this year, so it was great. And I think the 2 of them as well, they're great racers, Ocon and Alonso, both quite aggressive as well, so they pose an interesting dynamic. But we'll get onto the Ocon and Alonso sweepstakes a little bit later. Lap 9 came around and it saw Kevin Magnussen join the back of this Ocon Alonso Bottas battle now. So after we saw that Kevin Magnussen had closed the back of Bottas and the 2 Alpine drivers, we got a glimpse of Charles Leclerc, and on the radio they came up to him and said, oh yes, we're going with plan A. The Red Bull tyre degradation is a lot worse than ours, which is a nice little insight to see how the Ferrari manages the tyres and how good of a tyre management kind of driver Charles is as well. But it also told us what sort of strategy we'd see from Ferrari at the time, to see if they're going to go stick with the main strategy and see if they could tempt anyone into doing anything else. Also on the lap as well, we saw Lewis Hamilton start to move up the field. He got past Lance Stroll, and Daniel Ricciardo was the first to pit as well. He came in for hard tyres. I think a stop that actually proved to help him later on in the race, well, for a little bit anyway. Hamilton got a great move down the inside of Lando Norris into the final corner again, up to P11 the next lap, and then a lap after that, in lap 12, Esteban Ocon went for Alonso again into turn 1. He got close, but he literally couldn't go again. It was this battle was going on for ages. There was at one point as well, Ocon had to it got ahead of Fernando going into turn 1. But then he went deep, missed turn 2. And then gained an even further advantage to give the position back to Fernando at that point as well. But it was a great battle between the 2 Alpines. I can't stop talking about it. Jenson Button said at the time, the sponsors must be loving this. They had 10 minutes or so just of the 2 Alpine drivers on the track, which is like I said, Jenson said it there. The sponsors would love that. Good old BWT. It didn't last forever, however, as Ocon, the very next lap 13, was told to hold position, but he sort of took that a little bit too literally and lost the DRS train from Fernando Alonso, so Valtteri Bottas got past and split the two Alpines up. Also on the lap, we saw Lance Stroll and Alex Albon come in for hard tyres, so there are more stops coming in for the medium tyre runners, and we saw Lewis Hamilton get to P10. He passed Gasly easily on the straight as well. On that lap as well, we saw Guan Yu Zhou get a 5-second time penalty for gaining an advantage off track. He did come in and serve it, although it went a little bit wrong, as you'll find out later. So Charles Leclerc, who was doing very well on these new tyres, closing in the gap to Sergio Perez a little bit, came onto radio and said, "Oh, okay, let's box to overtake," which is an interesting one, but anyone who was doing well in his tyres, and the Red Bull wasn't on that occasion. So by the time they came down toward the entry of the pit lane, it was Sergio Perez that came in, and Charles Leclerc, who actually stayed out. Was it a dummy call? I think it was. We knew he was doing well. We knew Charles could have carried on, and at the end of the day, I think staying out probably helped him in this race, because otherwise he might not have even got a podium. I mean, it could just be the fact as well that they told him to do the opposite of Perez, which I guess it could be that. But I'd like to think that Charles was like, "Oh, okay," or Charles and the Ferrari team were like, "Okay, yeah, let's try and tempt Perez into the bits." So Perez came out just behind George Russell, so in P5, and Pierre Gasly also came in for hard tyres as well at that point. And then Nicholas Latifi crashed again. He brought out a yellow flag and then a VSC, which turned into a full safety car for the crash. It was a different spot to his crash in qualifying. We saw everyone come in basically, or everyone but the hard tyre runners. Oh, and Checo Perez lost positions not only to Charles Leclerc, but also his teammate Max Verstappen. Initially, he was down to P3, but Carlos Sainz was adamant that he was ahead when Sergio Perez drove past the entry, the exit of the pit lane. The pit lane line, Carlos Sainz thought he was ahead, and it turns out he was ahead. So at the start of the restart, Sergio Perez was meant to give it back. So Kevin Magnussen, Nico Hülkenberg and Lewis Hamilton all gained positions because they didn't stop, obviously. But someone who did gain positions, overtake over two people, in Pierre Gasly and Lando Norris, was Daniel Ricciardo, Lando's McLaren teammate. Daniel Ricciardo, from stopping earlier, he got into a groove on the hard tyres and he managed to overtake his teammate and Pierre Gasly under the safety car. Stroll and Albon and Gasly as well, who obviously stopped a little bit after Ricciardo. They couldn't get they basically barely got to grips with their hard tyres, and they lost out quite a bit. So as the safety car came in on lap 21, we saw Max Verstappen get alongside Charles Leclerc as alongside tactic again. Charles dropped the pack back a lot this time. He held them back for a long time before advancing off into the distance. It was a great safety car restart from Charles Leclerc again, like the one it was in Bahrain. Verstappen wasn't as disadvantaged as he was in Bahrain, but he still couldn't get past or close the gap to the Monegasque driver. And then Sergio Perez was still ahead of Carlos Sainz into turn 1, but after that he was told to let him go, so Sainz went out to P3 and Perez down to P4. So he lost 3 positions from that pit stop before the safety car. Basically cost him the race, because before that Checo was driving a great race. So towards the end of the first lap, after the safety car came in, we saw Lewis Hamilton begin to close on Kevin Magnussen, but it took him a couple of laps to get past him because the safety car didn't enable any. After the safety car, it takes 3 laps before the DRS kicks in. But when the DRS kicked in, Lewis Hamilton managed to get past him, going into the final corner on lap 23. Kevin Magnussen, though, he did a Charles Leclerc move from Bahrain, the one I liked, where he backed off to get the DRS on the second DRS zone, and he managed to get back at Lewis going into turn 1 in lap 24 with the aid of the Ferrari power unit, of course, which is clearly the best one on the grid. Or is it? The Red Bull was pretty good, fast on the straight line in this race. Yeah, either way, it's pretty close between the two of them, and then Mercedes, it might even be worse than the Renault power unit, to be honest with you, that the Alpines have. So after Magnussen did that, when the next lap came around and went down to the final corner, Lewis Hamilton, he learned he didn't go for Magnussen on that one, and then he waited to the second DRS zone at the end of turn 1, the first DRS zone in the lap, but the second one of the 2 consecutive DRS zones. So in lap 26 at turn 1, Lewis managed to get past the Haas driver. It was a very similar one to the Max Verstappen move in Bahrain on Charles Leclerc, the one where he was very, very far back, but he managed to get ahead just by outbraking down the inside. I think the Max one was on the outside, but the one just shows how powerful DRS is. But it's good because it just allows basically unlimited overtaking, which is it's like go-karting. It's great. So Hamilton looked too far back to overtake Magnussen on lap 26, but he actually managed to on lap 25, sorry, but managed to get ahead into turn one. And then we saw the Guan Yu Zhou stop go wrong. I think maybe someone either started the stopwatch too early or something went wrong. They didn't fill the 5-second time penalty, so he actually got another 5-second time penalty and then a drive-through penalty after those stops went wrong. So Guan Yu Zhou's race was unfortunately derailing in seconds, but he did pretty well in that race as well. He was unlucky to get points. And then we also saw Daniel Ricciardo overtake Nico Hülkenberg. We also saw Daniel Ricciardo overtake Nico Hülkenberg. He was obviously standing in for Sebastian Vettel for the second race in a row. Seb should be back for Australia though, into the final corner of lap 26. But he actually managed to get the DRS to get away too. So another good sort of intelligent decision from a driver. That one for Ricciardo. That sort of started the Nico Hülkenberg drop down the order on the struggling hard tyres narrative as Bottas and Alonso got past earlier. And then on lap 28 and 29 respectively, Lando Norris and Pierre Gasly both got past Nico Hülkenberg. Lap 33 saw Fernando Alonso pass Kevin Magnussen, so Alonso pretty much getting back to where he was before he came in. Magnussen obviously hasn't pitted yet. The Magnussen are starting to struggle on the old hard tyres, and that was for P7. And then but Magnussen somehow passed Alonso the next race. Magnussen closed very quickly, and then it was revealed why about a corner later, where Alonso had an engine overheat, and it literally said "call the car" on the steering wheel, as Jensen Button pointed out, and Fernando Alonso lost power and was out of the race. That was the first of many retirements in this race. Fernando Alonso, lap 36, and that began the chaos as lap 37 saw Daniel Ricciardo, who was driving a great race. He was on course to get decent points by the time the strategy had sort of played out. He had a similar problem and literally stopped at the start of the pit lane, and it brought out the double wave yellows. I feel really bad for Daniel Ricciardo. He came onto the radio and said, "Got no drive and I can't accelerate," and which obviously there are two things that you need to drive a car. Daniel Ricciardo, unfortunately, that his race derailed, as it did for Valtteri Bottas as well, who also retired. He came into the pits on that very lap as well. The race was hitting a bit of a chaos here, and 3 retirements all in the same lap, all with similar issues, I believe. I think it just shows the consequences of the racing in a very hot country, on a very 27 corners on the Saudi Arabia track, on a very sort of very fast but also physically requiring physically demanding track that is the Jeddah Corniche circuit. So Magnussen and Hülkenberg took advantage of the double yellows before the VSC came out and before the pit lane entry closed, and they dove into the pits to replace their hard tyres. Lewis Hamilton couldn't get in, I'm afraid, so he missed out. He had to wait for the pit lane entry to reopen after the virtual safety car. It was actually Fernando Alonso who brought out the virtual safety car. He couldn't get around the track because he already gone past the pit lane, and he got all the way to literally midway through the pit lane before the car gave in. So obviously he was sort of struggling around the track and he's out the race, but he was still had the car going. The car gave in the middle of the pit lane, which caused the pit lane to close and which caused the virtual safety car. So all the cars were cleared on lap 42 as Hamilton came in. He ended up P12 behind Kevin Magnussen, so the movie got done earlier. Lewis had some more work to do, I'm afraid. The virtual safety car allowed Max Verstappen to close up a little bit behind Charles Leclerc, obviously over Delta, but so Verstappen managed to somehow close in a little bit, and by the end of the lap he was within his DRS range of the Monegasque driver. So because it was a virtual safety car rather than a full safety car, Max Verstappen had DRS at the very next lap, and it set up a great battle which would last at the end of the race. For the last 8 laps of the race, we saw Leclerc and Verstappen fighting. It's great to see. It's great to see. We see the 2 championship protagonists wheel to wheel, 2 races in a row to start a season. I mean, there could be some other people who get in on the championship, maybe the Mercedes, if they do sort their porpoising issues out. and the power unit as well. But yeah, it was just awesome to see, really. But yeah, so going into the final corner on lap 42, we saw Max Verstappen get ahead of Charles Leclerc, but Leclerc, who had the DRS, managed to get ahead of Verstappen again, like in Bahrain. He went deep but stayed ahead somehow. I don't know how. And yeah, Charles Leclerc got back at him. On the next lap, on the final corner in lap 43, the Red Bull was so much faster than the Ferrari in that part of the track, so Verstappen managed to close like that. This time the Red Bull, who are much faster in that part of the track, the Verstappen Red Bull obviously managed to close up that much closer to Leclerc that they were almost side by side at one point, but both decided to brake very, very early. both of course to lock up, obviously trying to get to the DRS detection zone the slowest. It was Leclerc who ended up without the DRS, but he did manage to get out of the basically the flat spot of the tyre quickly, the quickest, and he just zoomed off into the distance. Verstappen did have DRS at that point, but because Verstappen came off worse after they both locked up, basically at the end of turn 1 of lap 44, Verstappen wasn't in within 1 second of Leclerc. So as Verstappen was regrouping, trying to get back at Charles Leclerc towards the end of the race, we managed to see Lewis Hamilton and Kevin Magnussen get past Stroll and Albon, moving up the field with their fresher tyres. And then lap 46, we saw Verstappen dummy into turn 1 to set up a move later in the lap. And then the middle DRS zone, we saw Max Verstappen get so much closer. Sorry, on lap 47. And then by the time the final corner came, he sniffed on the inside, and then decided against a move again. Max being conservative. This is a new Max, as they said in commentary. And but yeah, it won in the he won in the race ultimately. Spoiler: Max Verstappen won the race. I mean, I was going to tell a story, but yeah, Max won the race. Yeah, and then so Verstappen decided to wait for the pit straight to get the move done. But yeah, with another smart decision, he managed to get ahead of Charles Leclerc without even opening the DRS after the final corner. Then literally, but before the DRS zone even opened, he managed to get. He was literally side by side at that point. So Verstappen with clear advantage going into turn 1 on lap 49. It took a couple of laps for Leclerc to get back at Verstappen, but we managed to carry on the battle into the final lap. This is great, by the way. Just racing towards the end of the race. This is what Formula 1 should be. You know, if talk about where we've seen this recently, we saw the Verstappen and Leclerc battle in Austria 2019 for the win. That was a great one. We saw Verstappen and Hamilton in Hungary in 2019. I think it was maybe 2019. That was another battle like this one, where Verstappen and Hamilton in many times last year in 2022. In 2022, these sort of chasing down to win the race towards the end of the races are great, and we need more strategy to make these happen because they are box office. But obviously, team strategists don't want that because yeah, it's all about efficiency, really, isn't it? But it would be great if that was the case. So on the final 2 laps of the race, like I said, Leclerc took a couple of laps just to regroup and go for a final push on Verstappen. He looks to be on the back of Verstappen and going into lap 49 in turn 1, but then Verstappen is helped out by the fact there are double wave yellows in sector 1 because of the Lance Stroll Alex Albon incident which saw Albon shoot down the inside of Stroll and sort of like a tiny gap and damage his car, which caused him to retire, but also Lance Stroll's car as well. Albon will face a 3-place grid penalty for the race in Australia in 2 weeks' time, whilst Lance Stroll was hampered and finished towards the back of the race. Yeah, so the Stroll Albon incident saw Charles Leclerc sort of back off from Verstappen. I mean, he managed to sort of close him a little bit, which Verstappen noted, but they didn't sort of dig very much into. I guess it was sort of racing, but he was a little bit fast under the yellow flag. And then that was all cleared by lap 50, where Leclerc basically had 2 shots to win the race, and the first shot set up the final shot to win the race going into the final corner. He had 6 attempts to make up in that lap. He managed to get there, but as we saw Leclerc sort of going for a move or sort of getting close to Verstappen, the camera bugged out. And then sort of cut back into Max Verstappen rounding the final corner in the lead, and he won the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Congratulations to Red Bull. yeah, fair play, Max. I mean, starting from P4 and winning the race was great. You were helped by the safety car, but yeah, it was a great race between Max and Charles, and fair play to Max, three spots, and it was he had to. Basically, it was a new Max Verstappen one that we didn't see very often, a conservative Max, but he had to wait for his chance, and he managed to get the race win under his belt. And I think, obviously, I bet that felt good as well after what happened in Saudi Arabia last year. So just to recap, the top 10 were Max Verstappen in P1, Charles Leclerc in P2, Sainz remained in P3, although Perez did come back at him towards the end of the race. So obviously Sergio Perez was P4, George Russell P5 in a Mercedes, Esteban Ocon P6, the lead Alpine, obviously the only Alpine in the race after the Alonso retirement. The only McLaren was Lando Norris, finishing behind Ocon narrowly because there was a little battle towards the end of the race between Ocon and Lando. Ocon managed to get ahead of Lando into the first lap, and they came back to him on the final corner, almost overtaking Ocon a line like it happens to him for the podium in Saudi Arabia last year. But yeah, so Ocon P6, Lando P7, Ocon remained in front. One more lap and Lando probably would have been P6. Pierre Gasly in 8th place in the Alpha Tauri, pretty good drive, bearing in mind how much he was hampered. And then Kevin Magnussen P9, great drive for him. Again, the tyre strategy was great. I mean, he managed to get ahead of Lewis Hamilton in P10 by well, not the tyre strategy, but coming into the pits when just before the pit lane entry closed. And Lewis Hamilton P10 managed to get a point for the team, but unfortunately he was just in the wrong place of the track at the right time. Basically the opposite of Monza in 2020 when Gasly won. Hamilton pretty much pretty good drive from Lewis Hamilton, to be fair. So it was a pretty good drive from Lewis. He managed to obviously make up 5 places in the race, although there were only 13 finishes. But he seemed to be more at ease on Sunday than he was at Saturday. So obviously they made some tweaks, whatever they did under part family conditions seemed to work for Mercedes, or maybe Lewis just went away and it was a better driver. Maybe something was playing on his mind. Maybe obviously because Saturday was the day that they decided to race, maybe that was playing on his mind. I don't know, but I think he did all right. Did old Lewis. Hopefully Mercedes turned it around, because I do want to see him win his A4 championship. So that's pretty much it for the Saudi Arabian race recap. I hope you guys enjoyed that segment on YouTube. Thank you for watching, if that is the case. The rest of the podcast is on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast platform you listen to. It is on every single one of them, whether it's Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, even Audible. We're on all of them. I'm on all of them. And I hope you listen to the rest of the podcast, where I'll be re-ranking the 2022 driver pairings. I did it in an article a couple of months ago, but obviously Nikita Mazepin is no longer in F1, so I had to re-rank them. And there are some changes in my rankings as well. So listen to the rest of the podcast. Thank you for watching this video, and have a good rest of the day.